The bobcat's claws scraped helplessly against the concrete floor, her muscles tensing as the red nylon harness pulled tighter around her lean, spotted frame. Her breath came out in short, sharp bursts, white mist rising in the cold morning air inside the intake corridor of the county animal shelter. The building was sterile and echoing, the walls painted in shades too pale to feel warm. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly as if hesitating to witness what was about to happen. The handler didn't speak. He didn't look at her. His grip on the leash was firm, but not unkind. He was doing what he'd been told. The bobcat made a guttural, trembling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a cry. Something in between. Something tired. Something that had stopped trying to fight, but still didn't understand why she was being led away from the dim corner cage she'd spent the past week crouched inside. She didn't know that a form had been signed. She didn't know there were codes and labels marked unadoptable and aggressive. She didn't know her file had red ink stamped across the top that read, euthanized by Friday. She only knew she wanted to go back to the shadowy cage where she'd hidden behind the water bowl and watched every pair of boots that passed. In the hallway, the scent of bleach and anxiety lingered in the air, mixing with the faint musk of old fur. The bobcat hesitated at a corner, bracing her hind legs and leaning against the leash with what little willpower she had left. She looked up for a moment, not at the man dragging her, but beyond him, past the metal gate, into the narrow hall, leading to the clinical room with the stainless steel table, the room with the locked cabinet, the room they never returned from. On the far side of the corridor, someone watched through the narrow glass pane in the office door. A girl, no older than 20, stood stiffly behind a cluttered desk stacked with donation forms and volunteer clipboards. Her hand froze on the file she was supposed to be filing. Her eyes locked onto the animal's body language, the slow, low gait of something resigned but still afraid. The girl had seen hundreds of animals arrive and leave the shelter in her 3 months of volunteering. But there was something different here. The bobcat wasn't sick, and she wasn't raging. She looked lost, not wild, not feral, just misplaced, like she'd been pulled out of the story halfway through, and no one had asked why. Outside, a gust of wind brushed against the windows, carrying the scent of ash. The fires in the hills 2 weeks ago had blackened over 30 acres, pushing wildlife down into roads and neighborhoods. Emergency crews had brought in deer, owls, even a fox cub with burned paws. But the bobcat had been the last one, found crouched near a smoldering tree line, her fur singed on one side. She hadn't run. She hadn't attacked. She let the net take her, trembling, silent. And since then, she hadn't made a sound, until today. The girl opened the office door, just slightly. No one noticed. She didn't step into the hall, only leaned forward, watching. Her name tag read Maya. She hadn't spoken much since starting at the shelter. She didn't need to. Animals didn't require words. They just needed presence, stillness, patience, and something about the way this bobcat turned her head, as if sensing that someone was seeing her differently, made Maya's chest tighten. The handler tugged again. The bobcat lurched forward, her back legs resisting for one more moment before giving in. Her ears were flat now, her tail low, not in aggression, but surrender. They passed the first cage room, then the storage lockers, then the red exit sign that flickered above the door, leading into the exam wing. Maya's eyes followed every step. Inside the back room, a table had already been cleared. A vet tech was preparing the syringe. Routine, calm. No one cried over wild animals. They came in. They were processed. If they weren't fit for rehab or release, the law was clear. But the bobcat stopped walking again just before the final door. She turned her head, not to the handler, not to the table, but back toward the hallway, back toward the office door. Maya didn't move, but her hand lifted slowly, fingertips pressed against the glass, as if willing the door to vanish between them. The bobcat made that same low, broken sound, quiet but deliberate. The handler glanced back, puzzled. It wasn't a growl, not a warning, just a sound too soft for the animal everyone had labeled dangerous. And in that strange moment of pause, the door at the far end of the hallway opened. Dr. Karen Rothman stepped in, senior vet, 40 years of calm detachment, a clipboard in hand, and reading glasses perched low. She noticed a stillness in the hallway and raised an eyebrow. What's the hold up? The handler hesitated. She just stopped. Again. Dr. Rothman sighed. Let's get it done, please. We got 2 more intakes today. But Maya moved before she could think. She opened the office door fully and stepped out. Her sneakers made a light sound on the floor. The bobcat turned at the noise, eyes wide, golden, glowing faintly under the harsh fluorescent light. Dr. Rothman frowned. You're not assigned here, Maya. Maya didn't answer. She stepped forward, not toward the handler or the vet, but toward the bobcat. Slowly, 1 step, then another. The bobcat didn't move. Her head tilted slightly, ears flicking, but not flat anymore, not afraid. She's not aggressive, Maya said quietly, stopping 3 feet away. The vet blinked. She's a wild animal, Maya. Maya nodded. So are we, when we're scared enough. Silence. The bobcat didn't run, didn't flinch. She simply looked at the girl standing there, eyes calm for the first time. It wasn't a moment of magic. It wasn't a miracle. It was something smaller, realer, a breath being held between 2 living beings who saw something fragile in each other. And for the first time in the hallways long, echoing history, someone said, "Wait!" The room was still when the word hung in the air. Wait! No one moved for a moment. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting sterile shadows across the floor. The bobcat's golden eyes stayed locked on Maya, and for a breathless instant, everything else in the shelter blurred away. The tables, the staff, the forms and files and code rules that usually move like machinery. All that remained were 2 pairs of eyes and something invisible stretching between them. Dr. Rothman exhaled through her nose. Her voice stayed firm, but the edge of certainty had dulled. She's already been assessed. She hasn't responded to anyone in a week. She's too damaged, too unpredictable. Maya didn't flinch. She just responded now. The vet turned her gaze to the bobcat, still frozen in place, but no longer resisting the leash. Her ears were forward now, slightly. Her muscles no longer taut with dread. She was alert, but not alarmed, not aggressive. Something in her body language had shifted, and even the handler noticed. His fingers on the leash loosened slightly. Dr. Rothman sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Give her 1 day, 24 hours. If there's no behavioral shift, we proceed. Understood. Maya nodded once. She didn't smile, didn't thank her. This wasn't a victory. It was a borrowed window. The handler turned back, guiding the bobcat gently. This time not to the sterile room, but to a quiet side enclosure where injured animals were sometimes held for observation. It wasn't meant for long-term use. The cage was small and old, tucked into a low-lit wing of the shelter, away from the louder dogs and chirping birds. But it was warm. It was quiet. And for now it was safe. The door clanged shut behind them. The bobcat padded cautiously into the enclosure, ears twitching at every sound. She circled twice before settling into the farthest corner, where the shadows pooled thickest. She curled her body tight, tail wrapped around her haunches, her breathing still uneven. Maya stood outside the cage for a while after the others had left. She didn't speak. She didn't try to reach through the bars. She simply sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands resting in her lap, eyes steady. She knew enough to understand that trust didn't come from noise or force. It came from stillness and time. Outside, the wind rattled the old shelter windows, carrying traces of charred wood and wet leaves from the hills beyond. Maya glanced at the label on the bobcat's temporary kennel card. Unknown female, estimated 4 to 5 years, location found. Ridgeview Wildfire Perimeter. No name, no history, just a data point from a disaster. Maya remembered the fire. Her father's truck had nearly been caught in the evacuation line, trying to get back for their dog. The entire town had been lit in orange for 2 nights. Smoke had sunk into everything. Her bedroom still smelled faintly like ash. She leaned her head back against the wall and studied the cat. The burnt patch along her side was healing, but still raw-looking. The fur was matted in places, and she favored her left hind leg when she shifted positions. But she didn't look like she was dying. She looked like she was waiting for something, or someone. The first hour passed in silence. The second hour, Maya returned with a bowl of clean water and a dish of soft meat. She didn't place them inside. She slid them gently through the bottom hatch and then moved back to the floor. The bobcat watched her every move but didn't uncurl. The third hour, the food was untouched. It wasn't until dusk, when the shelter quieted and most of the day staff had gone, that something changed. Maya sat once more beside the enclosure, her sketchpad resting loosely on her knees. She wasn't drawing the bobcat, at least not directly, just loose shapes, leaves, smoke, curves that echoed the tension in the air. She heard the softest sound, a shift of weight, a paw against a metal floor. Maya didn't look up. She let the moment pass on its own. The bobcat moved, slowly, dragging herself toward the bowl. She sniffed once. Then again, a low rumble of a growl vibrated in her chest. Instinctive, defensive, but not aimed at Maya. Just the world. Just the pain she still carried. Then she ate. Maya didn't react. No smile. No words. Just a breath. A small, quiet breath. The next morning, Maya was back before the sun touched the windows. She sat in the same spot, her sweater wrapped around her shoulders. The bobcat was awake, pressed against the far wall, watching. When Maya lowered herself onto the floor, the cat didn't shrink. She didn't look away. She just blinked once, slow, deliberate. By noon, Maya had started reading softly, not to the bobcat, just aloud. Pages from a nature journal about wild animal behavior. The cadence of her voice was even, calm. She read not to comfort, but to exist beside something. By dusk, the bobcat crept forward, sniffing near the edge of the gate. Maya stayed still. She knew the rules. No touching, no reaching, no expectations. But inside, her heart thudded with the knowledge that the animal had chosen proximity. Each day that passed brought a small shift, a flick of an ear toward Maya's voice, a soft sound in response to her presence, a moment where the bobcat didn't flinch when Maya refilled the water dish. Staff noticed. Some rolled their eyes. Others shook their heads. "Don't get too attached," they'd mutter. "Wild things stay wild." But Maya didn't see wild. She saw a creature that had been torn from its world, thrown into steel and cement, and expected to understand. And then, on the 5th morning, something happened. Maya was squatting beside the enclosure, gently placing a warm towel near the bars, when the bobcat stood fully and padded toward her. Slowly, confidently, no limp. She stopped a foot away from the bars, her body tall, posture steady. Her golden eyes didn't waver. Maya didn't move. And then, without noise, without warning, the bobcat lowered her head and pressed it gently against the gate. A moment, a choice, a kind of quiet surrender not born of defeat, but of trust, of the first flicker of belief that not all hands meant harm. And Maya, still breathless, still grounded in the silence, whispered the only thing she could think to say. "Hi." It wasn't a word to tame or claim, just to acknowledge, to honor the space they now shared. The next morning dawned with low fog curling around the shelter building, wrapping the faded brick walls in a shroud of quiet. Inside, the usual hum of routine was slower than usual. The vet techs moved with practiced efficiency, their voices low, their minds on the intake list. But in the far left wing, away from barking kennels and intake clamor, a smaller world was unfolding. Maya arrived before the first shift clocked in. She walked softly down the hall, holding a folded blanket in her arms and a thermos tucked under one elbow. The shelter always smelled faintly like disinfectant, but she had grown used to it. She paused at the corner before the enclosure, her body still for a moment as she listened. No growl, no hiss, just a rhythmic sound of slow breathing, like a tide tucked between concrete and steel. She stepped forward. The bobcat was already awake, curled loosely in the center of her space, not hiding, not crouched in fear, just there, present. Her eyes opened slowly at the sound of Maya's approach, but she didn't rise. Her tail flicked once in acknowledgement. Maya smiled, but it was small, almost hidden. She knelt and placed a blanket on the floor outside the cage, then unscrewed the thermos and poured warm water into the fresh bowl. She didn't speak. She never started the day with words. The bobcat watched her, blinking slow. There was something different now in the way she looked at Maya, not just recognition, but expectation, as if she anticipated the girl's presence, trusted it, wanted it. Later that morning, when the shelter was fully awake, Maya returned after helping with the small dogs. She found a quiet stool and brought her sketch pad again. This time, she drew the bobcat. She didn't think about style or detail, just lines that tried to capture what it felt like to sit beside something wild and slowly see it stop trembling. She didn't notice at first that the bobcat had moved closer to the bars again. It was only when she felt the faintest rustle of breath, warm and steady, that she realized the animal was right there, her head tilted slightly, her eyes flicking from the pencil to Maya's hand and back again. It had only been 6 days. And yet, Maya knew something had shifted beyond recovery or shelter policy. The bobcat wasn't healing just physically. Something deeper was mending. She was watching, learning, adapting, not just surviving, choosing. The staff began calling the enclosure Maya's wing, half as a joke, half with awe. No one else had been able to get near the bobcat without defensive snarls or flattened ears. But Maya could sit within a foot of the bars, refill food, even reach gently to slide toys through the gate. Dr. Rothman had stopped protesting. She watched from afar now, arms folded, saying little. But sometimes, when she passed the enclosure, Maya noticed her pause. Just briefly. On the 8th day, Maya brought something new, a thick rope with feathers tied at one end. She sat near the bars and slowly rolled the end back and forth, careful not to jerk or toss. The bobcat didn't react at first, just watched, eyes unreadable. But then, in a movement so fast it felt imagined, she pounced. Not at Maya, not at the rope and aggression. At the toy itself, paws catching it with swift precision, then releasing, then catching again. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The movement was playful, measured, not the thrash of a cornered animal, but a controlled leap of a creature reclaiming instinct on her own terms. And then, when the bobcat caught the rope once more, she made a sound. Not a growl, not a cry. A chuffing breath, soft and low. A greeting. Maya froze. She knew what that sound meant. In wildcats, it was a gesture of peace, of acknowledgement, of curiosity. She whispered, "I hear you." From that moment, the routine deepened. Maya stayed longer. She spoke more, not commands or questions, just stories, memories, pieces of her life. She didn't share with anyone else. Her voice remained soft, her movement still. And the bobcat responded, not with tricks or obedience, but with presence. She would pace when Maya was gone, rest when Maya sat nearby, groom herself fully for the first time since arriving. The name came slowly, not decided, but discovered. Maya said it one afternoon, almost absently, as the bobcat circled near the gate. "Ember." The cat looked up. Maya tilted her head. "That's what you are. Not fire. What survives after." The name stuck. She told no one. One evening, during the final sweep before closing, Maya lingered past her shift. The hall was dim now, the sun dipping low behind the hills. A faint orange glow slipped through the high windows. Ember was lying near the front of the enclosure, her paws tucked beneath her chest. Calm, waiting. Maya reached out slowly, fingers extended beneath the gate, palm open. Ember didn't move away. She didn't lash or hiss. Instead, she stepped forward, inch by inch, until her nose touched the center of Maya's hand. Maya didn't breathe. The contact lasted only a second, but it was deliberate, a choice. That night, Maya dreamed of ashes lifting from the forest floor, not dead, but dancing, rising. The next day, Dr. Rothman summoned her to the back office. Maya's chest tightened. She expected reprimand, maybe even termination. She had bent rules, stayed late, done things no volunteer was trained to do. But the vet didn't look angry. She looked tired. She slid a folder across the desk. We received an offer. A private sanctuary in northern Colorado. They take in borderline cases, injured wildlife that doesn't quite fit rehab protocols but still shows signs of potential. Maya opened the folder. Photos of a wide, open enclosure. Trees. Climbing structures. Snow. She'd be watched, Dr. Rothman said. Monitored. It's not release, but it's life. Maya looked up. Her eyes were wet. She's not just potential, she said quietly. She's already herself. The vet nodded once. You'll need to be the one to get her in the crate. No one else can. It was a strange kind of honor. One born not from training, but trust. The next morning, the crate arrived. Large, padded, dark enough not to feel like a trap. Maya placed it inside Ember's enclosure, door propped open. She didn't force. She didn't bait. She sat down across from it and waited. Ember approached on her own, sniffed, circled, and then, without hesitation, stepped inside. Maya followed, latched the door, and whispered, "Good girl." The journey hadn't ended, but Ember's cage had, and neither of them would be the same. The transport van rumbled gently beneath them as the highway curved away from the shelter, disappearing into hills that framed the northern edge of the state. Maya sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the crate secured in the back. She couldn't see Ember directly, but she could hear her breathing, steady, low, not panicked. A part of her had feared that Ember would revert the moment they left the only space she'd known in weeks. But she hadn't. She had entered the crate with grace, sat with calm, and remained still through every bump and stop. The sanctuary was nearly 5 hours away, nestled deep in the woodlands where the roads thinned and human noise gave way to wind and bird call. The deeper they drove, the more Maya began to feel a nervousness settle over her. What if Ember didn't adjust? What if, once released, she vanished into herself again, silent and unreachable? By the time the van slowed near the sanctuary gates, Maya's chest was tight. The compound was wide and sprawling, hidden behind a long dirt road flanked by pine and oak. Beyond the gate, high fences lined perimeter, but inside were trees, hills, and a stream that glimmered under morning sun. A handful of small enclosures circled the property, each one blending into the natural world, as if designed not to contain, but to protect. A woman named Lila met them near the intake barn. She wore jeans tucked into boots and had a clipboard under one arm. Her eyes were kind, but assessing, used to weighing what could be saved against what would always remain wild. "She's a Ridgeview cat?" Lila asked. Maya nodded. She responds to Ember. Lila glanced toward the crate, her gaze sharp. "And you're sure she's stable?" "She's not tame," Maya replied, "but she's aware. She chooses calm when she feels safe." Lila gave a small nod. "That's more than most we get." The release process was slow. Ember's crate was brought to a transitional enclosure, large enough to roam, but contained enough to monitor her reactions. The space had shade, a perch made from stack logs, and a small hollow lined with straw. It was meant to ease wild animals into the new landscape without overwhelming them. Maya stayed back as they unlatched the crate. The door was opened, but Ember didn't bolt. Instead, she stepped out carefully, placing each paw with caution, her nose lifted to test the air. The scent of pine and wet earth reached her first, then the chirp of a distant bird, then the quiet presence of Maya just outside the wire fence, sitting cross-legged once again. Ember turned toward her for only a moment. No sound, no gesture, just a look. Then she stepped fully into space and disappeared behind a mound of rock and bramble. Lila watched from nearby. Some of them vanished for days. We let them. But Ember did not vanish. That night, she emerged near the feeding station, cautious but present. She sniffed at the fresh meat, nudged it with her paw, then ate. By the third day, she was lounging atop the log perch, her body stretched in a beam of sunlight, her ears twitching at the sound of squirrels in the trees. She watched the world without tension, as if reclaiming a piece of herself that had been buried under smoke and fear. Maya wasn't allowed inside the enclosure now. The sanctuary had rules. This was Ember's world, and she needed to find her footing without dependency. But Maya was permitted to observe from a viewing post just 20 feet away. She came every day during her scheduled 2-week transition period, sitting quietly with her notebook, watching. And every day, Ember looked at her, not as a handler, not as a threat, as something familiar, a witness, a thread from the past she was still willing to acknowledge. But on the 8th day, everything changed. The sky darkened early. A storm rolled in over the hills, unexpected and fast. Thunder cracked across the treetops, and the sanctuary scrambled to secure outer gates and shelters. Maya was already on site when the first bolt split the sky. She had just arrived at the viewing post when she noticed movement near the perimeter fence of Ember's enclosure. It wasn't Ember. It was a coyote, lean, ragged, and bold. Somehow, it had made its way past the first gate, slipping into a weak spot in the mesh and approaching the feeding area. These weren't uncommon occurrences in sanctuaries, predators sensing weakness or food. But this one was aggressive and fast. Ember had emerged from the hollow just moments before. She was heading toward her perch when the coyote lunged, not at her, but at the food tray, snapping and growling. In a flash, Ember wheeled around. She froze, not in fear but in calculation. Her body coiled, tail stiff, ears flat. Then she moved. With a force Maya hadn't seen since the day Ember had resisted the shelter leash, she launched forward, inserting herself between the coyote and the food. A deep, guttural growl ripped from her chest, not wild panic but protective rage. The coyote hesitated, thrown off by her confidence. Ember didn't back down. She stood her ground, her entire body tense and tall, daring him to challenge her. Lila and the team were already sprinting down the path with air horns and poles. But it wasn't them who made the coyote retreat. It was Ember. She took one step forward, growled again, lower, slower, and the intruder, after one final bark, turned and bolted toward the gap it had come through. The team secured the perimeter. The gate was repaired. The storm passed. But what lingered, what held everyone in silent awe, was Ember's choice. She had defended her space, not from instinct alone, but with understanding. Later that evening, Lila turned to Maya and said she wasn't just reacting. She was protecting what she saw as hers. Maya nodded, heart full, throat tight. She's not surviving anymore. She's belonging. The next morning, when Maya arrived at the observation post, Ember was already waiting near the fence line, calm and poised. She didn't approach. She didn't perform. She simply sat, facing the trees, ears relaxed, body at ease. And for the first time, Maya felt no ache to reach through the fence. She didn't need to touch her, didn't need to hold on. She had watched something once broken rise from ash, not because someone forced her, but because someone waited, listened, believed, and Ember, in turn, had done the same. The sanctuary awoke slowly in the light of early morning, mist rising from the damp soil as birdsong filtered through the canopy. Ember stood at the far end of her enclosure, atop a moss-covered boulder, her golden eyes surveying the horizon. She was different now, still quiet, still wild, but no longer retreating from the world. Her movements were fluid, assured. Her coat had filled in, thick and healthy where once there were patches of burn and scar. Even her injured hind leg moved without hesitation. It had been nearly a month since she arrived. In that time, she had done more than adapt. She had claimed the space as her own. She knew its rhythms now. The rustle of morning feeding, the patter of rain on the metal roof of her shelter, the soft sound of Maya's footsteps as they crunched down the gravel path toward the observation post each day. Maya still came regularly, though her official transition period had ended. The sanctuary had offered her a part-time position assisting with behavioral studies and enrichment plans. She took it without pause. Being near Ember wasn't just a duty anymore. It had become part of her own healing. And Ember's transformation had become something far more powerful than a rescue story. It was a mirror of quiet strength, of endurance, of reclaiming identity, without needing to be tamed. But change rarely comes without a final test. One morning, Maya arrived to find Lila waiting at the main gate with a furrowed brow. She held a manila folder in her hand, its edges bent and creased. "There's been an issue," Lila said, voice low. Maya's stomach nodded. "With Ember?" Lila shook her head. "Not exactly." The state's wildlife board flagged her file. Someone from the shelter system pushed a notice through the system claiming she was transferred in error, that the Bobcat marked for euthanasia wasn't the one approved for sanctuary placement. Maya's heart dropped, but they signed off. The vet cleared it. Yes, but paperwork was apparently misfiled. A bureaucratic error. Technically, but now they're questioning whether she should have been placed here at all. They're calling for a reassessment. Reassessment. The word echoed like a threat. Maya's thoughts raced. Ember, after all this time, after clawing her way back from smoke and silence, might be taken again, might be reprocessed, caged, judged by new criteria. Lila placed a steady hand on Maya's arm. "We'll fight it, but I won't lie to you. If they decide to follow protocol, we may be forced to return her to a state-run facility for reevaluation. And you know what that means." Maya knew it meant going backward. It meant risking everything Ember had found, everything she had reclaimed. That evening, Maya sat at the observation post as usual. But this time, her hands trembled slightly as she opened her notebook. Ember was farther off than usual, lounging near the stream bed, her head tucked under her paw. The light dappled across her coat in soft golds and shadows. Maya whispered softly, not expecting Ember to hear, "They might take you from here." The words disappeared into the trees. She watched for a long time, searching for something, anything, that could assure her Ember would be okay no matter what came. But there was no response, just a quiet rustle of leaves and the hush of flowing water. The next morning, Maya returned with a decision. She would speak at the hearing. She would present Ember's case herself. Photos, journals, observations, witness accounts. She would build a story not from paperwork, but from presence, from proof that Ember was not a liability. She was life, returned to form through connection, not control. The hearing was scheduled 3 days later. Maya spent every moment preparing. She met with Lila, reviewed files, rehearsed her words, and still, a weight sat in her chest like stone. Then, the night before the hearing, something happened that Maya could never have planned. She arrived late, long after closing, to drop off an enrichment item for the next day, a log hollowed and filled with hidden treats. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the sanctuary was bathed in the blue of twilight. As she approached the gate to Ember's enclosure, she heard a noise, not movement, not rustling, something softer, a low sound, like a breath being drawn and held. She froze, and then, from the shadows beyond the perch, Ember emerged, but she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her, smaller, wobblier, barely visible in the fading light, was a kitten, a bobcat kitten, no more than a few weeks old. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't possible. But there he was, pale markings still fuzzy, eyes wide and uncertain, following Ember like a shadow. And Ember, strong, poised, utterly maternal, looked over his shoulder, watching to ensure he followed. Maya stumbled backward, breath stolen. She hadn't been pregnant when she arrived, had she? But then it clicked. The weight Ember carried. The way she'd been so slow to rise in the early days. The way she'd stayed curled tight in the shelter corner. Not just in fear, but in protection. She had been pregnant, and had never let them see. Until now, until this moment, when Maya needed something greater than proof. She needed truth. The next day, Maya didn't just speak at the hearing. She showed them photos. She told the story. She explained how Ember had evolved, not into a pet, not into a display, but into a guardian, a creature who had risen not only for herself, but for something more. And then she revealed the image taken just that morning, Ember with her kitten, walking side by side under the trees. The room went still. One board member cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "And you believe this reinforces her place in sanctuary?" Maya met his eyes. "No, it justifies it." There was a pause, then a quiet nod. The decision was unanimous. The file was closed. Permanently. Ember would stay. Not as a fluke. Not as an exception. As a mother. As a survivor. As part of the land she had reclaimed. That evening, Maya returned to the enclosure just as the sun melted into the treetops. She stood at the fence, her eyes wet. Ember approached slowly, the kitten bounding clumsily behind her. And for the first time since her rescue, Ember made a sound Maya had never heard before, a soft, almost melodic growl. Not a warning, not a cry, a greeting, a recognition. And as the kitten nestled beside her paws, Ember turned her eyes toward Maya, calm, unwavering, and full of something that once had no name. Now it did. Trust. The wind moved gently through the tall pines as the sanctuary settled into evening. Dappled sunlight filtered down in golden streaks, painting the forest floor in patches of warmth and shadow. The air was cool but soft, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp soil. Somewhere far in the distance, a hawk cried once, then all was still. Maya stood just outside the viewing post, her fingers resting lightly on the wooden rail. The quiet around her wasn't empty. It was full, alive with breath and stillness, with the weight of everything that had happened over the past 6 weeks. She watched the enclosure through the gaps in the fence, her gaze fixed on the 2 figures nestled under the wide canopy of a maple tree. Ember lay stretched in the fading light, her eyes half closed, her chest rising and falling in slow, even rhythm. At her side, the kitten, small but growing bolder by the day, rolled lazily onto his back, batting at a fallen leaf with uncoordinated paws. He let out a small squeak of protest as it blew out of reach, and Ember lifted her head, gently curling her body closer to him. A mother now, in every way. The sanctuary had named him Ash. It was fitting. Where Ember had burned and endured, Ash had emerged, new, bright, and wild in his own way. But the fire that had nearly ended them both had become something else entirely. A story that didn't end in smoke or silence, but in growth, in roots planted deep in soil where nothing was meant to grow again. Maya had watched it all. She still came every day, though her work hours had shifted to other parts of property. She helped with hawks, with foxes, with deer recovering from injury. But Ember was never far from her thoughts. There was something in that bond that didn't require closeness anymore. It had evolved beyond the need to sit beside the cage or speak into silence. It was something understood. And still, even from a distance, Ember would glance up when Maya approached. Not every time, not on command, but often enough to feel like a tether hadn't been cut, just stretched gently between 2 beings who had changed one another without needing words. One afternoon, Lila approached her as they both watched from the observation point. "She's thriving," Lila said quietly. "And the kitten, well, it seems he's inherited her instincts. He's cautious, but he's watching everything, learning fast." Maya smiled, eyes still fixed on the scene before her. She taught him. No one else could have. Lila nodded. "You know, there was a time we didn't think she'd make it, let alone become something like this. But I think you saw something the rest of us missed." Maya shook her head gently. She was always there. She just needed space to remember who she was. The words lingered, soft and certain. Time passed. The season began to change. Leaves turned to amber and rust. The air grew crisper in the mornings. Ember and Ash adapted without resistance, curling up together on colder nights, roaming farther inside their territory during the day. The sanctuary expanded their enclosure by another 1/4 acre, allowing more natural terrain for them to explore. Maya watched as Ash began climbing higher, chasing squirrels up trees, leaping from logs with newfound strength. One morning, Maya brought a camera to the observation post, not for documentation, not for reports, just to capture something personal. She waited until the light hit the trees just right, casting long golden rays across the underbrush. Ember stood atop the ridge then, her body outlined by light, Ash clambering awkwardly up behind her. For a moment, they both paused, looking out over the sanctuary. The trees, the stream, the hills beyond. Maya snapped one photo. It wasn't posed. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, and it held everything. The fear, the fire, the stillness, the fight. That image would stay with her forever. In the final weeks of autumn, Maya decided to take a few days off. It was her first break since the shelter incident. She needed space, not a rest, but to reflect. She left a note with Lila, promising she'd return soon. She didn't say goodbye to Ember. It didn't feel necessary. But on her last afternoon before leaving, Maya walked to the fence one final time. She stood in silence for several minutes, eyes searching the trees. Ember appeared from the brush with Ash at her heels, their coats glowing in the low afternoon sun. They paused just past the boundary of the viewing area. Ember lifted her head. Their eyes met. There was no sound, no movement, just the kind of stillness that speaks louder than words. And then, slowly, deliberately, Ember walked forward until she was just at the edge of the enclosure fence. Ash trailed behind, curious, unsure. Ember stopped there, her gaze fixed on Maya. Her muscles didn't tense. Her tail flicked once. Maya crouched slowly, resting her hand against the cool metal. She didn't reach through. She didn't speak. And Ember, after a breathless pause, stepped forward until her nose touched the spot where Maya's fingers rested on the other side. A second, two, then she turned, curling her body around her cub, guiding him back into the trees. Not away, just forward. That night, Maya walked through the sanctuary's main gate with a quiet sense that something had come full circle. Not completed, not finished, but whole. Some stories didn't need to end in rescue. Some stories ended in return. Return to strength, to instinct, to home. And in that final image, Ember, tall and sure, leading her cub beneath the trees where no leash had ever touched, Maya saw what survival truly meant. It meant rising from ruin. It meant finding someone who waited without asking anything in return. It meant walking away, not because you were done, but because you were finally free. And sometimes, in the quiet of that freedom, trust speaks the loudest, without ever needing to be heard.